Hi everyone, thank you so much for tuning in to this virtual book tour. This is very kindly being hosted by the lovely people at Newham Books. Newham Books were actually voted the best independent bookshop in London last year in 2019. And as I'm sure I don't need to emphasize to you, it's really important that we do whatever we can to support independent bookshops during COVID. So if you are inspired at any point during this talk to order a copy of my book, yes you can. You can do so by going to newhambooks.co.uk. I'll also be doing a live Q&A on Instagram in about a week's time on the 1st of June, and I'll give you details of how you can get involved in that at the end of this chat. This talk is coming to you from lockdown. This is my actual bookshelf. I know it's so difficult to believe because it's so beautiful. It's not a prop. And if you hear any noise in the background, I have a neighbor over yonder who has been doing DIY for about a gazillion years. I don't know if he's building a whole nother house from scratch or what the hell he's doing, but there's always some sort of chainsaw-esque piece of equipment involved. So I'm very sorry about him, but there's not an awful lot I can do. These are lockdown realities. I have been struggling a little bit. I'm kind of into the swing of quarantine life now, but I do still wake up every morning thinking, have I dreamed this? Have I dreamed the past couple of months? Because it's still surreal. And I think the thing I'm struggling with most is staying in the moment and reminding myself right now everything's okay. So often I think when the future is uncertain, we ask ourselves, what if? And not only is that pretty pointless because none of us know what's going to happen, but it also adds to our anxiety because, as I have written about in the book, our fear, anxiety and stress mechanism comes from a part of the brain called the amygdala that can't really differentiate between real and imagined fears. So if we're constantly coming up with worst case scenarios, our amygdala is keeping us in a state of flight or fight, which means that we feel anxious, even more anxious than we would do normally the entire time. So I'm trying to resist the urge to do that. And one of the ways is I have been doing all of the things that I've been putting off my whole life up until now. I have finally started writing my novel. Yeah, I'm one of those who always said, yeah, I really want to write a novel. But unlike most people who say that, I fully understand how hard that is. You know, you sometimes bump into people at parties and sometimes you tell them you're an author or you want to be an author, and they'll say something like, oh yeah, I've been meaning to write a book. I just need to write it. And you think, yeah, okay, you crack on then. No understanding that it's a skill that might require honing or that you might need to treat it like a job. Anyway, that's just an aside. Writing fiction is a completely different skill to writing non-fiction. All of the books I've written so far have been non-fiction, and the only thing I can liken it to is if writing non-fiction is playing piano, writing fiction is playing guitar. Technically, it's all music. It's a completely different skill set. But I am having a lot of fun with that, and grateful for the opportunity to finally get around to it. I've also been spending a lot more time with my cat, China Girl. She won't come if I call her because she's a cat. But if you're curious to know what she looks like, this is her in her not at all humiliating Christmas outfit that we bought for her. And she is loving the fact that both me and her human dad are working from home at the moment and giving her lots of attention, which I think she probably thinks is the right way of things. I do know from speaking to a lot of young people that studying in lockdown is tricky. It's tricky to motivate yourself. It's difficult when you don't have the things that you're just so used to having at school, like peers to bounce ideas off of, obviously, but also, you know, access to the library and your teachers whenever you want to speak to them. all of these things are helping us to study, and we don't really miss them until they're gone, and they're things that it's difficult to recreate digitally. Most of all, though, it's difficult to stop yourself procrastinating and to motivate yourself, particularly when the weather is glorious like it is today, and your friends are online and there's a gazillion distractions around the house. And fortunately, that was something that I really did a lot of research into for Yes You Can. And the full title of the book is actually Yes You Can, Ace Your Exams Without Losing Your Mind. And I know what you're thinking. Natasha Devon, you have written a book about exams and released it during the 1 year in human history, probably, when there are no exams because they've been cancelled because of coronavirus. It feels a little bit churlish to be annoyed about that, because obviously it's not the worst thing that's happening during this crisis. But yeah, that was bad luck. However, if you actually look at the contents, and on my Twitter page, I've actually pinned to the top of my Twitter profile an image of the contents page, and I've circled the parts that are relevant to quarantine. And it's actually most of it, because of course I wrote this for people who are on study leave. So I'm thinking, okay, you don't have the structure that you're used to going into school or college or uni every day. You're trying to rub along with your family. You're all stuck in the same house. You want tips on how to look after your mental health when you don't have, for example, your sports club or your drama club or the other things that you're using to blow off steam. And it's all in there, and it's all absolutely relevant to the times that we're going through now. So it is an ideal quarantine read. Again, if you want to buy it, please do. But I thought I would give you an introduction to the book, but also share with you the sections that I think are most relevant to people who are trying to motivate themselves to study during lockdown. First of all, I want to talk to you a little bit about what inspired me to write the book. When we are not living in a sort of really rubbish version of a George Orwell novel, my job involves going into about 3 schools or colleges or universities every single week, all over the world, but mostly in the UK. And my job is really to universalize the mental health conversation. When I was at school back in the 90s, we were taught about mental health, but it was very much restricted to mental illness. So we had these visiting speakers who would come in and share their stories of addiction or eating disorders or severe depression. And it's really important that people do that, don't get me wrong. But we also didn't apply it to ourselves because we didn't think that it was particularly relevant to us. In the same way as if somebody came in to share their story about having had cancer, you would find it interesting and you would be engaged with the story, but you wouldn't necessarily apply it to your everyday life unless you were going through it yourself or somebody close to you was. It's exactly the same principle. But mental health isn't just about mental illness. Everyone has a brain, and that means we all have a status of mental health. There is such a thing as mental fitness, things that we can do every day to understand, monitor, and nurture our mental health better. And that's really what I wanted to explore in the lessons that I was creating. So I started by asking teenagers what was missing from their PSHE. I said, if you could pick a personal health and social education lesson on anything in the world, what would you choose? And the answers that came back were those everyday mental health challenges, things like body image and social media, sexuality, friendship difficulties and bullying, and academic anxiety. Not just anxiety around exams specifically, but just the enormous amount of pressure that a lot of young people feel to consistently perform academically. And that was the inspiration behind this book, Yes You Can. But I also wanted to impress upon anybody that reads this that their mental health is relevant, it's directly linked to their academic performance. So many of us think of our mental health over here and our performance over here, whether it's our performance at work or at school or whatever. Whereas in fact, they're much, much closer together. So I'm going to begin by reading you a section of the introduction, which just explains a little bit more of my thinking around that. Ask any teenager to list the causes of anxiety, stress, and general mental anguish in their life. The chances are academic anxiety will appear near the top. I know this because it's literally my job to ask teenagers to list the causes of anxiety, stress, and general mental anguish in their lives. For more than a decade, I've been visiting an average of 3 schools and colleges every week throughout the UK and beyond, delivering talks and conducting research on mental health, body image, and gender equality. I work with 14 to 18-year-olds and use the information they give me to get a better understanding of what hinders, motivates, and interests them. In turn, I use this information to create presentations and workshops together with experts in psychology and neuroscience, as well as campaigning for changes which will better support the needs and interests of under 25s. My job regularly takes me to Parliament, where I have terrific fun telling off politicians, and to TV studios, where I explain to commentators who think they're being terribly clever when they use terms like Generation Snowflake, why they're definitely not. I like to think of myself as having created a platform for young people, many of whom cannot vote, and are therefore more likely to have their needs and interests ignored. To do my job, I have to listen. And I mean really listen, and be prepared to have my assumptions challenged. It'd be far easier to be one of those people who says, I remember what it was like to be a teenager, and create my classes and campaigns on the basis of my recollections. But to do so would be to ignore 2 fundamental factors. The first is that our brain has a tendency towards rose-tinted nostalgia. That's why adults often describe their teenage years as the best of their life. They almost definitely weren't. They're cherry-picking the aspects of teenage life they wish they had now, like no mortgage, /taxes, /wrinkles, and forgetting everything else, like hormones, homework, /heartbreak. The second is that our frames of reference are radically different. It's absolutely true what my mum told me when I was about 13, for example, that the things I was teased for at school, being swotty and having big lips, are some of the aspects of myself I appreciate most now as an adult. Mum also predicted I would bump into the first person who broke my heart one day and think, ugh, what did I ever see in them? Both of these premonitions came to pass, but hearing that wasn't the slightest comfort to me at the time. In fact, to my teenage ears, it sounded a lot like my mum was belittling my problems. Similarly, when a family friend said to me, just days after I'd got the excellent A-levels I'd chucked every ounce of effort for the past 2 years into obtaining, after the first couple of days at uni, no one will ask or even care what you got in your A-levels. I felt the overwhelming urge to kick him swiftly and repeatedly in the plums. Didn't, you'll be relieved to learn. When it comes to the role exams and grades will play in your life, there's no point in me telling you what I know with the benefit of hindsight. I can only work with what young people tell me they're going through right now. And having had countless conversations with hundreds of teenagers, what I've gleaned is this. You'd rather ace your exams and lose your mind than nurture your mental well-being and get a lower grade. The message I have received has been loud and unequivocal. Young people are hyper-aware their mental health is important, but for a variety of reasons, their exams are more important to them. Whether or not I agree is immaterial. This is our starting point. If, like the people I've described above, you're of the staunch opinion that grades are more important than your well-being, I'm not here to challenge that. I will, however, ask you why you think you have to choose. Where has this idea that academic learning and mental health are at odds with one another come from? I suspect the answer is in part the media. TV and radio shows are forever pitting stereotypical trads, These are people who think education was better when pupils were seen and not heard, did their homework using a quill by candlelight, and were thrashed with canes if they didn't hand it in on time. And progs, people who think schools should do away with reading altogether and pupils should instead go and sit under a tree to write a song about the beauty of a blade of grass, at the end of which everyone will get a medal for participating for entertainment value. Just FYI, there's a footnote here that says these might be slightly reductive characterizations of trads and progs, just in case there's any teachers watching. Similarly, schools often have well-being weeks, as though having a relationship with your body and mind is an endeavor you can choose to opt out of. It would be a great deal more convenient, I am sure, if we had the facility to open a door in our foreheads, scoop out our brains and plop them in a jar to sit in a classroom somewhere, absorbing everything we needed to know while we got on with the other aspects of life. Unfortunately, at the time of writing, this is a feat beyond the scope of human endeavor. Everything is connected. Your physical fitness affects your mental health, and the well-being of your mind impacts your ability to learn. Perhaps most excitingly, academic learning has been shown in numerous studies to make us happier and healthier. There is a sweet spot consisting of activities proven to make you a more effective learner, and which also handily improve your mental fitness. This book is an exploration of the point at which the worlds of academia and well-being meet. It aims to make you more likely to achieve the highest grade of which you are capable, as well as emerging with your mental health and self-esteem intact, maybe even improved. It's going to allow you to understand your brain better, as well as give you practical guidance and exercises to help you through your revision and examination periods. Hopefully, that sounds good to you. That's the premise upon which the book was based. And what I'm going to talk you through now are the 3 sections of the book which I think are most relevant to people who are trying to study in lockdown. Since we have been in lockdown, or certainly since schools have been closed, I have been doing some digital mentoring with teenagers, and I've suggested some of these activities to those of them who have been struggling, and they have found them helpful, so hopefully you will too. But if you have any questions or if you have any feedback, do get involved in the Instagram live that I'm going to be doing on the 1st of June, and again, details at the end. So there's 3 things that I think are particularly relevant to people studying in lockdown. And the first is timetabling. No one has time anymore. That made me sound really old, but it's true. I'm often shocked by, when I go into schools, I speak to young people and I tell them that teenagers on average need about 9 hours sleep a night. And often they laugh. Say, there's absolutely no way that I could do everything I have to do in a day and get 9 hours of sleep. It's just not possible. And then we kind of dig down further into that, and there's some real issues with time management in there. So I'm going to give you a little introduction to the section on time management in the book, which will hopefully get you thinking about how to organize time a bit more effectively so that we're working smarter rather than working longer. A lot of the students I talk to tell me there literally aren't enough hours in the day for them to do the amount of study they need to do. They tell me they get home and spend 6 hours on homework and revision every single night, which doesn't even leave them enough time to get the amount of sleep they need. When I speak to their teachers, they tell me this is much more time than the work should take. So why the anomaly? Just as an aside, the most amount of independent study you'd be doing in a school or college setting would be for your A-levels. And teachers tell me you shouldn't be doing more than 2 hours a night. 2 hours. It's usually because, if they were being entirely honest, the 6 hours that student has spent at their desk or wherever they're doing their study hasn't been completely dedicated to homework or revision. Do you study with chat windows open? With your phone next to your laptop and notifications switched on? You might not think that the 12 seconds it takes to reply to a message is interfering that much with your study, but it sets you back more than you think. Imagine you're a juggler and your thoughts are balls. Now, I don't know if you can see this, but this book has illustrations by Ruby Elliott, who is better known as Ruby, etc. She has an Instagram account which you should definitely follow. She's hilarious. She has brilliant cartoons about life and specifically about mental health. And this is the second time actually we've teamed up together to do a book. And she's drawn here a person juggling thought balls. Whenever you make a connection between ideas, you're introducing another ball into the circle. By the time you're in full problem solving or essay writing mode, you probably have about 6 balls in the air. If you get a message notification and stop to answer it, you drop all the balls. Yet as we know, jugglers can't start from a place of juggling 6 balls at once. They always begin with 2, then they introduce a third, then a fourth, and so on. So the act of answering the notification doesn't just cost you the time it took to answer it. It's also the time it takes you to get yourself back into the headspace where you have all 6 balls in the air. If you're at school or college during the day, the most independent study you should be doing in the evening is 2 hours. Do an experiment. Set yourself 2.5 hours to study and break it up with an activity. There's suggestions for activities in here and also the reasoning of why you should incorporate them into your study. Dedicate yourself to nothing but study and break time activities for the 2.5 hours and see how it changes your overall productivity. You might be so in the habit of checking your phone every few minutes that you find you're dropping balls anyway the first couple of times you try it. Once you're into the swing of it, if you do still genuinely have more work than can be done in your 2.5-hour allotted time period, then speak to your teachers. You've been overloaded. Now, I know the idea of having an agreement with your friends that you will be offline and incommunicado for 2.5 hours is like, oh, but please just try it and just see how it changes your pace of work, because you might find that you free up a whole hour where you can do nothing but WhatsApp or be on Instagram or whatever. I mean, those are the things that I do. So you probably do something different that I don't even know about. But whatever it is that you would want to do, if you don't try and multitask, then you're going to find that you get your study done quicker. Having said that, you do want to incorporate breaks into your study, and there's reasons why that's important in here too. So a delicate balancing act really between not breaking off every 3 seconds, but introducing regular breaks throughout. Hopefully that got you thinking. The next thing that I want to talk to you about is perfectionism. I am a massive perfectionist, by which I do not mean that everything I do is brilliant. What I mean is I have quite a negative inner voice. If I don't do something perfectly, I think about it for ages afterwards. I'm also prone to avoiding things that I don't think I'll be good at. And if I didn't check myself, I'd always be seeking external validation. So I have to resist the urge to kind of text my friends all the time and be like, do you love me? Am I a good person? That's what being a perfectionist is. And what the studies show is that perfectionism in Generation Z, so this generation of teenagers, is off the charts. And there are all kinds of reasons for that, to do with the environment that we live in and the society that teenagers have grown up in. I actually worked with probably the UK's leading expert on perfectionism for this book. He's called Dr. Thomas Curran, and he wrote a great paper on perfectionism in teenagers while he was at Bath University. And there is a little quiz that you can do in here to determine whether or not you are a perfectionist. But the chances are that you have perfectionist tendencies if you are a teenager. And the problem is that they often stop us from doing our best. It's the opposite to what you might think. People think perfectionists give 100% to everything. That's not the case. Like I said, they often avoid actively the subjects that they don't think they're as good at. And one of the consequences of this is a tendency to procrastinate. I'm just going to talk to you about the part in the book which is about procrastination and its relationship to perfectionism. Why do I procrastinate? That's the title, that's why I did it in that voice. It's generally a myth that people who procrastinate are lazy. In fact, if you could see inside their head, you'd find a lot of activity, worrying about outcomes, anxieties about not being good enough, and fretting about where to start on their giant to-do list. Procrastination can often be a perfectionist trait born out of not wanting to get anything wrong. If you never start, then technically you can never fail. The fear of failure is actually something our society teaches us. We aren't born with it. You don't see toddlers trying to walk, falling over and declaring they just can't do it before sitting on their nappy-clad bums forevermore. If you are procrastinating, take a few minutes to do a short mindfulness activity before your study session. Tune into your thoughts. Try to observe where your fear of failure is coming from. What is the worst you think can happen? If the answer comes to you easily, try writing down your worst fears. I often do this because written down, a lot of my anxieties look, not to put too fine a point on it, utterly dark. For example, if I can see a friend of mine has read my WhatsApp, but they haven't replied, my brain says, they aren't replying because what you sent them has offended them in some way. You were somehow really insensitive in a way you couldn't have fathomed, and you're a bad friend, and no one really likes you. That's not actually what it sounds like inside my head, but I think we can all agree that was a fun voice. Logically, I know none of this is true. People often read WhatsApp messages on the fly and think, I'll reply later. Yet it's only by articulating that thought and giving it oxygen that I can see how ridiculous it is. Acknowledging your fear takes away their power. If you try to squash them, your amygdala can think you're ignoring it and scream even louder to get your attention. So I've then included an exercise for perfectionists. I've written it, obviously I didn't know that coronavirus was going to happen when I wrote this book, so I've written it as though you will be physically with your friends, but there's no reason why you couldn't adapt this activity and do it, for example, over email. If you relate to a lot of what I've written above and often find yourself procrastinating because of a fear of failure, try this. Get together a group of friends, 4 or more ideally, and sit in a circle with a piece of paper and a pen in front of each of you. Write your name at the top of the piece of paper and pass it to your left. When you receive a piece of paper from the person to your right, write your favourite thing about that person whose name's at the top of the page. Even if you don't know them very well, try to think of something positive about them. Fold the paper over so that only the name is visible at the top, not what you've written, and pass the paper to the person on your left. Continue doing this until you receive the paper with your name at the top. You can then unfold it and see what's been written about you. What you will likely discover from doing this exercise is that the reasons why you are genuinely valued are very different from the reasons you are usually told you are valued. We spend so much time commenting on each other's grades, possessions, hair, or other physical attributes, we can forget the real reason we chose people as friends. Of course, your grades are important, but they're not the most important thing about you. If, and this is a big if, you fail, you'll still be funny or brave or kind or a good listener or any of the other attributes listed on the paper. Keep the concertina of paper with you to remind you that your worth is more than a grade. There's a freedom in that. People think if they stop worrying about their grades, they will stop trying academically. And actually the opposite is true. It gives you the freedom to throw yourself into things that maybe you aren't so confident at because you've lost that fear of failure. The final and perhaps the most important thing that I would like to talk to you about during this session is motivation. It's so difficult to motivate yourself. So many adults are struggling with this at the moment because they're working from home for the first time and they just don't have any structure or routine. But quarantine represents a really good opportunity. And honestly, I know that it's kind of trite to say that there are any silver linings to coronavirus, because obviously we would all rather it didn't happen. But you know, most people just go through their lives and they don't think about what really makes them happy. They just go primary school, secondary school, college, university, job, retirement, death. And it's only in like the last 2 years of their life that they start reflecting and think, was that the best decision? Or have I always put other people before myself? Or I wish I hadn't done things that way. If you understand what truly drives you, what puts fire in your belly, not only is that going to ensure that you're going to make decisions which will lead to you being genuinely more happy and fulfilled, it's also the trick to motivating yourself to do anything. So even if you have a subject that you're dreading, that you always put off, that you're like, oh, you really don't want to do, if you understand your driving force, you can make your homework or your study match that driving force by changing sometimes the environment in which you do it or the way that you do it. And it's going to ignite a motivation in you. It's going to make you want to get it done. So this is the final part of the book that I would like to share with you, and I think it's super, super important. So first of all, understanding what differentiates your driving force from the things that we're told we should be motivated by. Your driving force is the reason you get out of bed in the morning, by which I mean not the alarm on your phone, but the thing that puts fire in your belly and makes life worth living. People who know what their driving force is not only tend to give their work their full attention and therefore achieve more, they're also generally happier. Pretty much as soon as we're born, society aggressively tells us what we should be striving for, to make lots of money, to buy lots of stuff, to show off. Yet the fact is, having stuff doesn't make you happy. Briefly euphoric, yes, but not truly contented. Our culture also has a vested interest in persuading us that we should never be content with what we have. After all, people who have enough don't make great consumers, and we live in a capitalist society which depends on regular financial transactions to thrive. If you allow your environment to dictate your motivations, you'll inevitably end up resenting working because your life doesn't really inspire you. Say, for example, your driving force is freedom, but you haven't taken the trouble to work that out. You're offered a job with a high salary and long hours, and you think, this is what success looks like, I should take it. After a few months of never seeing daylight because you're trapped in the office, you're going to end up very dissatisfied no matter how many zeros are in your pay packet. A superficial reward is anything that happens at the end of an achievement that doesn't serve your driving force. Examples include money, likes on social media, or grades. Now, I talk a little bit about how you can discover what your driving force is. There are some activities that you can do, but one of them is to work out what your biggest value is. And by far, my biggest value is fairness. I just want everything to be fair. I think that's why I'm a campaigner now. And well, after I worked this out, I became a lot happier because I realized someone might offer me something which has a benefit to me, either financially or otherwise. But if it's not fair, if it doesn't feel fair to me, I'm not going to be happy about taking that opportunity. So now, whatever decisions I make always have to feel fair to me at the time. And that's led to me being a lot more content with the overall direction that my life is taking. And I've put an example in this book of how that obsession with fairness played into my study when I was doing my A-levels. My mum still talks about my obsession with Cardinal Woolsey when I was doing my A-levels. Legend has it that I used to talk to her about him through the crack in the bathroom door while she was trying to have a relaxing bath. I neither confirm nor deny the truth of this. For those unfamiliar, Cardinal Woolsey was a close advisor to Henry VIII. In true Henry VIII style, when Cardinal Woolsey had outlived his usefulness, he was executed, having been tried on almost totally fabricated charges. I read outside the required reading on the Tudors, just because I wanted to understand why What were the flaws in the legal system which allowed Henry VIII to get away with such behaviour? What was Wolsey's legacy? Was any kind of relationship with the monarch back then a Faustian pact? Yet, you guessed it, the story of Cardinal Wolsey had, unbeknownst to me at the time, played into my overwhelming sense that everything should be fair. From what I could glean from my reading, Wolsey was a stand-up bloke with great intentions, his only crime being to stick to his religious and social convictions in the face of Henry VIII constantly changing his policies owing to thinking with his libido. Hence my thirst to know more. If you can see the ways in which your study matches your pre-existing interests, you'll always find it interesting, only in a means to an end type way. For example, you might be really into philosophy, but not so much into maths. If you can find a way to think about maths philosophically, it will motivate you to do it. That's easier than it sounds. The universe is literally made up of numbers, and people who study theoretical physics, i.e. really, really fancy maths, are the closest to understanding its secrets. Maths might help you discover the meaning of life, and if it does, please email me and tell me what it is. And then what I've done is I've listed some of the most common motivations that I encounter when working with young people and simple ways that you can make your study match those motivations. I would really like you, if you are intending to join the live Q&A, to dedicate some time to thinking about what genuinely motivates you. And most people don't know straight off the cuff. So if you're thinking, I don't know, that's perfectly normal, takes a little bit of time to think it through. But if you bring your ideas about motivation to that conversation, then I can share some tips with you then. So if you do want to get involved with the live Q&A, it's going to be on the 1st of June at 6 p.m. And it's going to be on the Instagram page of Pam Macmillan, which is, their handle is Pam Macmillan, which is handy, it's easy to remember. So that's the 1st of June at 6 p.m. Please do join me then and ask any questions that you have about the book or anything else, although, no, not anything else. When you work in primary schools, you very quickly learn at the end of a lesson to say any questions about the lesson, not just any questions, because otherwise they'll say like, what's your second favourite colour? I don't know what my second favourite colour is. Anyway, you can ask me what my second favourite colour is if you want, but ideally I would like questions about the 1st of June, 6 p.m. Thank you so much again, Newen Books, for hosting this session. I really hope that you found it interesting and enjoyable, and I will catch up with you soon. Bye.